Disturbingly effective, he praised their techniques as years ahead of their time, noting how they emphasized isolation, ritual, and strict discipline to bring about spiritual clarity. Within months, the Convent of Eternal Tears was fully operational. Women began arriving, some sent by concerned families, others coming of their own accord. Advertisements placed in Boston and other cities described the convent as a sanctuary for women suffering from spiritual unrest, melancholy, or nervous conditions. The reality was far more troubling. According to records, over 600 women pass through the convent's iron gates between 1799 and 1832. Fewer than half were ever seen again. Those who returned often refused to speak of their time there. Some had clearly suffered physical trauma. Others seemed detached, disoriented, like pieces of themselves had been stripped away. The sisters maintained that those who stayed had chosen a life of quiet contemplation. They said others had moved west or returned home in secrecy, seeking lives of privacy. But there were no letters, no farewells, no evidence, just silence. Concerns were quietly raised over the years. A few local men spoke of hearing screams in the night during supply deliveries. A blacksmith said he'd been paid in gold coins to repair restraints, but without firm proof, and with the Ashford women holding sway through their wealth and reputation, authorities hesitated to intervene. Then, in 1832, a fire broke out in the convent's west wing. The blaze was quickly contained, but during the cleanup, a young laborer stumbled upon a hidden room behind a collapsed wall. Inside were rusted surgical tools, restraints, and journals written in a mix of Latin and English, filled with observations, sketches, and clinical notes about the women who had stayed there. The documents, later seized by authorities, revealed a horrifying truth. The convent had served as a site of systematic experimentation. The Ashford sisters, under the guise of spiritual healing, had been conducting psychological and physical tests, pushing the boundaries of human endurance, studying trauma, and documenting behavioral changes with clinical detachment. Dr. Hartwell, confronted with these findings, fled the area. He was never seen again. The journals indicated that many of the women had died as a result of these experiments. Others had survived but were subjected to isolation and forced rituals meant to induce psychological breakdowns. There were diagrams of confinement chambers, records of starvation routines, and accounts of sensory deprivation. One journal entry by Sister Prudence read, "Progress is slow, but promising. Subject 47 has begun to show signs of full dissociation. She no longer recognizes her name or reflects emotion when addressed. Soon, we will test reconditioning responses." The most disturbing testimony, however, came from a survivor known only as Clara, whose statements were sealed in the main state archives for more than 100 years. Clara described months spent in a basement chamber with no light, where she was subjected to sleep deprivation, repeated emotional manipulation, and what she called soul separation rituals. "They made you believe you were the problem," she wrote. "Then they took you apart, piece by piece, until you couldn't remember who you were." After the fire and the discovery of the hidden room, the Convent of Eternal Tears was permanently shut down. The remaining women inside, just 17, were relocated to nearby settlements and placed under the care of local families and churches. The Ashford sisters vanished. Some said they boarded a ship to Europe under false names. Others believed they escaped deeper into the wilderness. No one was ever charged. Over time, the site fell into ruin. The stone structure slowly crumbled, overtaken by forest. But rumors persisted of screams still echoing through the trees, of travelers who lost their way near the old convent grounds and came back confused. Sometimes changed. Today, nothing remains but the foundation stones, covered in moss and silence. But the legacy of the Convent of Eternal Tears lingers. The journals, survivor statements, and official records were eventually made public. Historians now refer to it as one of the earliest documented examples of covert psychological experimentation on American soil disguised as religious care. Some call the Ashford sisters monsters. Others argue they were pioneers who crossed ethical boundaries. In pursuit of understanding the human mind, the truth may lie somewhere in between. Whatever you believe, The story of the Convent of Eternal Tears is a reminder. Not all horrors wear the mask of violence. Some speak in soft tones, behind locked doors, offering healing while hiding harm. Do you think the Ashford sisters truly believed in what they were doing? Or were they simply using faith as a cover for cruelty? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, real events that still haunt the corners of history, subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, remember, not every sanctuary is safe, and not every healer comes with good intention. Security measures around the convent. Workers who had once been hired to maintain the property were gradually let go, replaced by younger staff brought in from outside the region. People with no ties to the local community and no reason to ask questions. Supply deliveries were limited to just 2 days a week, always under supervision, and never beyond the loading area near the back entrance. Meanwhile, rumors about the place continued to spread quietly. Hunters and trappers avoided the woods nearby. A few townspeople mentioned hearing strange noises during late evening hours, high-pitched wails, rhythmic chanting, and the occasional sound of metal clanging deep within the forest, but with no hard evidence, and the convent continuing to present a calm, charitable public face. No formal action was taken. Thomas Brewster never recanted his story. Over the years, he repeated it in taverns and town meetings, insisting he knew what he saw. But as time passed, fewer people were willing to listen. The Ashford sisters remained untouchable, shielded by their reputation and their strategic alliances. And while Deacon Morrison never spoke out publicly against the convent, he never fully relaxed either. He continued to watch from a distance, quietly advising families to think carefully before sending their daughters for treatment. He began keeping his own records, notes that wouldn't be discovered until decades later, long after the convent had closed its doors for good. What was really happening inside the Convent of Eternal Tears may never be fully known. The official version tells of devout women providing care to those in distress. But behind that story lies a far more unsettling possibility, one supported by eyewitness accounts, private journals, and unexplained disappearances. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the silence between what was seen and what was believed. Do you think Thomas Brewster truly witnessed something sinister that night in the woods? Or was it the product of fear, exhaustion, and imagination? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you're interested in more stories that challenge what we think we know about history, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Until next time, remember, just because a place is quiet doesn't mean it's safe. Based on the type of behavioral issue being corrected, her notes included not just technical steps, but observations about patient responses, how changes in specific areas of the brain seem to reduce anxiety, erase memories, or suppress emotions altogether. The Ashford sisters believed they were refining a process, not curing illness, but reshaping people entirely. Their language shifted over time, too. Early journals focused on spiritual healing and moral correction, but by the 1820s, their records read more like the work of clinical neurologists. Terms like emotional recalibration and cognitive compliance began to appear, replacing older phrases like spiritual cleansing or moral reformation. Despite the deeply disturbing nature of their experiments, their growing medical credibility shielded them. The fact that prominent physicians and institutions were engaging with them, even praising their work, made local scrutiny nearly impossible. To most of the outside world, the convent was a forward-thinking facility led by educated, devout women committed to helping those in need. Inside Millbridge, however, doubts continued to grow. Some families began refusing to send their daughters, even when strongly advised by doctors or clergy. A few quietly moved away, unwilling to risk exposure to the growing unease surrounding the convent. But without formal complaints or hard proof, and with a community still shaped by strict social expectations and religious authority, no public accusations were made. The women who returned home reformed were accepted back into their communities, praised for their newfound obedience, and often married off quickly. Their families told themselves the treatment had worked, but those who looked closely noticed what was missing: the spark in the eyes, the subtle quirks of personality, the memories of a life before treatment. What came back from the convent wasn't always the same person who had gone in. And for the women who never returned, there were no graves, no goodbyes, only polite letters, vague reassurances, and a lingering sense that something had gone deeply wrong behind those stone walls. The story of the Convent of Eternal Tears continues in the next chapter. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. If you've made it this far, let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think was really happening behind the convent's locked doors, and would you have been brave enough to question it? Her treatment involved targeted damage to areas of the brain believed to influence critical thinking and independence. The postoperative notes listed significant improvement in compliance and elimination of argumentative tendencies. Margaret, like so many others, was recorded as a success. Another document included a letter from a physician in Berlin thanking the sisters for their most recent shipment of preserved tissue samples and asking for further data on emotional flattening procedures. The tone was disturbingly casual, treating the contents like routine academic research instead of the results of inhumane experiments. Sheriff Hawthorne, deeply unsettled by what he was reading, realized the implications. This wasn't the story of a delusional woman, it was a credible, well-documented account of systematic abuse. He contacted Judge Alton Crenshaw, one of the few local officials with the authority to initiate a formal investigation without drawing too much early attention. After reviewing the evidence Sarah had brought, Crenshaw quietly assembled a small group of deputies and trusted townsmen for an unannounced visit to the convent. The raid was carried out at dawn, just for days after Sarah's escape. The aim was to gather further evidence without alerting the sisters, who might destroy records or move patients if given any warning. What they found inside confirmed Sarah's claims in horrifying detail. The upper floors were exactly as described: sparse, silent, and sterile. The residents moved in eerie unison, avoiding eye contact and speaking only in whispers when prompted. But the basement revealed the truth. Behind locked doors, the investigators uncovered surgical rooms outfitted with tools and restraints. Preserved organs, charts, and brain diagrams were organized meticulously. Cabinets held vials of chemicals, scalpels of foreign design, and detailed records covering hundreds of patients. Some of the women confined to lower levels were still recovering from procedures, confused, weak, and in visible distress. Several required immediate medical care, and at least 3 were deemed too far gone to be safely moved. The Ashford sisters were arrested without resistance. Mother Superior Agatha maintained her calm demeanor, insisting that everything they had done was in service of moral reform and medical advancement. Sister Prudence attempted to destroy records, but was stopped before she could burn the most critical files. Novice Temperance, visibly shaken, remained silent throughout the arrest and was later found to be carrying a personal notebook full of behavioral experiments and psychological conditioning notes. The convent was shut down, its doors sealed under judicial order. News of the case spread slowly at first, with many local families reluctant to admit their relatives had been involved. But once the documents were examined by external authorities, physicians, legal experts, and eventually the press, the scandal could no longer be contained. Investigations in Europe revealed connections to universities and hospitals that had unknowingly incorporated the Ashford research into their teachings. Quiet retractions followed, and several prominent doctors resigned or were censured. But for the victims, the damage had already been done. Sarah Whitman testified at the trial, which became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in early 19th century New England. Her calm, articulate account of what she endured helped sway public opinion. The sisters were convicted on multiple charges, including unlawful medical experimentation, kidnapping, and criminal negligence leading to death. While some viewed the punishment as insufficient life sentences rather than executions, the conviction marked a rare moment of justice for the vulnerable. In the years that followed, efforts were made to reunite survivors with their families and provide care for those still suffering the effects of their treatment. Sarah became an advocate for reform in how women's mental health was understood and treated, publishing a memoir that became widely read in reformist and abolitionist circles. Her writings helped spark early conversations about consent, medical ethics, and the rights of women to control their own bodies and lives. The convent of eternal tears was eventually demolished, its remains left to the forest. But the story, and the questions it raised, endured far longer than the stone walls that once hid its secrets. And Margaret Temple, 3 former medical students, expelled from the University of Edinburgh in 1796 for conducting unauthorized surgeries on unwilling patients. Rather than end their work, the trio went underground. They assumed religious identities and established the convent as a front for continuing their experiments. Dr. Hartwell admitted that he had first been drawn in by their detailed anatomical knowledge and research potential, but had quickly found himself complicit in their operations. He confessed to performing or assisting in dozens of procedures and helping falsify records to disguise the true nature of their treatments. Despite intensive efforts by local and federal authorities, the Ashford sisters were never captured. Reports of sightings emerged from various cities across the U.S. and Europe over the next decade, but none could be confirmed. It's widely believed they used their medical knowledge and international connections to escape prosecution and continue their work in secret under new identities. Back in Milbridge, the fallout was intense. Families who had sent their daughters, wives, or sisters to the convent began demanding answers. Lawsuits were filed, and the local government faced growing pressure to provide restitution to the survivors and the families of the deceased. Several institutions that had unknowingly received data from the sisters distanced themselves publicly and issued formal apologies, though none admitted full awareness of the methods behind the research. The story of the Ashford sisters sent shockwaves through the medical world. Their work, while horrific in execution, had demonstrated surgical concepts that would later become central to the development of neurology and psychiatric medicine. But the ethical cost was enormous. In response, several countries began drafting stricter regulations on human experimentation, and medical schools started including formal ethics training in their curriculum, a legacy shaped as much by fear and outrage as by progress. Sheriff Hawthorne remained in office for another decade, but never fully recovered from what he had uncovered. He declined to speak about the case publicly, though in private letters to colleagues he described it as a descent into something that no one should ever have to see. Sarah Whitman's courage in breaking that silence ensured that the truth, however painful, would eventually come to light. Her account remains one of the few voices to speak for the hundreds of women who couldn't. And while the names of the Ashford sisters faded into myth and rumor, the damage they left behind remained very real, shaping both the ethical frameworks and historical memory of generations to come. Decades. The systematic exploitation of vulnerable people, all under the banner of medical progress and societal good, shows just how easily high-minded goals can be used to justify horrifying acts. One of the most unsettling parts of this story isn't just what the Ashford sisters did, it's how those around them responded. The silence that followed their exposure speaks volumes. Families, institutions, and officials chose to look the other way, burying the truth instead of facing the uncomfortable reality of what had happened. In doing so, they allowed the pain of so many victims to fade into obscurity and left the door open for similar abuses to happen again. This story is a clear warning about what can happen when the drive for scientific discovery runs unchecked, especially when it targets people society already considers expendable. That 3 women were able to carry out such a program for over 20 years, with support or at least quiet acceptance from respected professionals and local leaders, shows how dangerous things can become when ethics take a back seat. So what do you think? Could something like this really have stayed hidden for so long in early America? The evidence suggests it's possible, and it's a sobering reminder of the need for compassion and accountability in every field, especially those involving human lives. Do you believe something like this could still happen today, hidden behind polished reputations and claims of progress? Let us know in the comments. If this story caught your interest and you want to hear more unsettling pieces of forgotten history, be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who loves exploring the darker corners of the past. There are many more stories out there, ones that powerful people hoped we'd never find. See you in the next video, where we uncover another hidden chapter of America's past.